Today we're talking the Enneagram. Where did it come from? Should Christians trust it? And how can we use this tool for good? Welcome to the To Be the Church podcast, where we explore what it looks like to be the church in today's culture. I'm Tyler. Andrew and Ben are taking the week off, which is good because I have someone far more handsome and with far better voice than either of them with me today. My new friend, Luke Hendrix. How you doing, Luke?
I'm doing really well. Yeah.
So my dad has been on this podcast before.
Awesome. So I would resemble that comment.
No, but I was going to say, outside of me and my dad, there's been no father-son combination on this podcast, and your son Adam has been on this podcast at least once, maybe twice, talking about liturgy and the way the church frames gatherings. That would have been about 5 or 6 years ago, though. So it's definitely a long break between Hendrix.
But if anybody saw it and remembers, they're going to pick up some mannerisms here.
Yeah.
It's a curse. So
I think we did that interview before YouTube existed. So, it's been quite a while. Cody and Brian are behind the cameras today hanging out. If you're listening on your podcast app and you did not know, we have a YouTube version of this show at youtube.com/to be the church. Feel free to check it out there if you would like. So Luke, you're here today, not just because I called you in to do a podcast, but you're a semi-new addition here to the team at Northwest Gospel Church.
I am. That's right.
So you are new to NGC, but definitely not new to the Portland area or the Northwest or to ministry.
No, I have spent more time in the Northwest now than I've spent anywhere else in my lifetime. That's now, 33 years in the Northwest. Currently, though, the last 21 years has been here in Vancouver and then serving churches in the Portland area and beyond.
Yeah. So what does that service look like? What has your main role been in those 21 years?
Well, we came back to the Northwest in 2000, and I came back to an association of churches, an organization representing churches in 4 states, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Alaska, about 250 to 270 churches, and was brought into that position to serve basically the next generation within the world of church. That did include youth ministry. It also included planting of churches and pastoral development. I was there 2000 to 2008, then went back into the local church and served at Imago Dei Community for 8 years as an executive pastor there. And then leaving Imago, served Colossae Church down in west side of Portland for about 4+ years.
As executive pastor as well?
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then most recently, your full-time gig now is what?
I'm actually back with that organization, Church Venture. Interestingly enough, the guy that's now the executive director I've known for quite some time, and he actually asked when I was freed up from local church ministry and said, hey, here's what I'm looking at trying to do. And he's been a local pastor for about 25 years and asked. And initially I kind of said, I kind of done that before. I'm not sure if I want to jump back into that. But as it would have it, the Lord led, and not to be too melancholy here, but it does feel like in ministry, this is the 4th quarter for me. So the idea of just where would I want to invest time, if I could choose. And I do love the idea of talking to pastors and to church leaders that are really looking for renewal and strengthening and just trying to be the church, which that's what this podcast is all about too.
So you spend your days talking to pastors. A lot of churches you're working with are at moments where they need guidance or counsel, both in the area of church health, sometimes in crisis, all over the spectrum. But what has that been like day to day?
It is reactionary. Churches will call and say, we've got an issue, a problem, we're looking for a pastor, or we're stuck, or we're in need of some assessment. Can you come in and give us some oversight or an opinion on what's going on? Day to day, those things come as they come. As you know, in church work, you're never really scheduling those things. They just kind of happen. So a loss of a pastor, and they're formed a search committee and are looking for a pastor. How do we do this? What do we do? I can step in and start to help with that. It's a lot of coaching, so that's the stuff that comes at me. On the proactive side, I am trying to produce, for lack of a better term, programs or receivables, if you will, that will help churches as it relates to strengthening. If I could just divide it up and say, we got categories of renewal for the pastor, for the church, for its associations, and we're not necessarily dictating what they are, but what does it look like to be associated and accountable at a larger level? And then help with how do they posture themselves, or at least attempt to better the kingdom. So beyond them, what does that look like in strengthening? So it's a lot of consulting that way.
Nice, cool. So you may be listening to this and you're thinking, hey, I go to NGC. I've seen Luke around on Sundays. I thought you said he was a part of our team, but he's doing this thing. And so, this has been a pretty cool opportunity. So because of the nature of that role and the remote nature of that role, you have the ability to be around here a couple of days a week.
Yeah. With Church Venture, it is ministry by objective. And one of the things that I'd said walking into the job was that I'd really like to be connected to a local church. And that consulting is always kind of this weird thing. You're out there and you're talking to guys, and if you're not in the game, it really tends to lead to, well, I remember we used to do it this way, versus I'm in it, I can see it, I know what's going on in our church, it feels a little more credible. So I definitely wanted that. And they were open and said, nice. Yeah, it's ministry by objective, so we're not clocking hours per se.
Cool. Yeah, so you're here with us a couple days a week, helping us in the areas of discipleship and formation, preaching a little bit. Did that for the first time here just a couple weeks ago. I'm excited to have you on the podcast today, specifically because we have a question that came in.
Yeah.
And when I was talking to you about this question, you're like, "Oh, I've read some stuff on that," and so I was like, "Sweet, you know more than me." So let's get to it. So here's a question that came in from a listener. It says, "Hey guys, I would love to hear your opinion on the Enneagram. It seems to be the most popular personality test amongst Christians. I haven't thought much of it, but just listened to a podcast about the occult origins of Enneagram and how it is linked with the New Age movement happening in progressive churches. Thoughts? Is it just another personality test, or is there more to it that we should be concerned with?" So this is a question that came in from a listener, but I've had thoughts like this too, because every once in a while scrolling social media, I'll see Christians, beware, the Enneagram is of the devil. And then the next post I see is some prominent pastor saying, how to love fours if you're a 3, and whatever it is. And so like that. So I've done a little bit of research. I just finished a book on the Enneagram from a Christian, an Episcopal pastor.
Right.
Kind of on the Enneagram and your faith even, and how that plays out. But even as I started talking to you about it, you showed your level of expertise over mine in about 3 seconds. So let me just throw that question to you. Let's start with this.
Yeah.
This person listened to a podcast about the occult origins of Enneagram, how it's linked with the New Age movement. What would your thoughts be just on that sentence?
I think it's accurate. So we don't have substantial evidence of where the Enneagram came from past about the first part of the last century.
Okay.
There will be a lot of references to, this came from the church fathers or something farther back, and none of that can really be substantiated. So we really have it just, a century plus that we can draw from.
So we know, though, that it was likely around before that, but
yes,
okay,
yes, that would be true. So it was occultists that grabbed a hold of it, and they were really trying to. Initially, didn't have anything to do with personality. It was a way of viewing the cosmos.
Okay,
and then it was another occultist that lined up personality traits and brought that into that whole picture. They often labeled this as the face of God, these 9 points. And so occultists grabbed it. It had nothing to do with the church. Okay, we don't really get any church activity until about 1970. And it's the Catholic Church and some monks, I think they were Franciscan, that jumped in. And the most prominent for us would be Richard Rohr, who is controversial at multiple levels, but has been a spiritist and a number of things there. He's done a lot of good work. It's hard to know where his theology lands, so it's a little bit skeptical. But he's done the most work on this. So if we looked at it from that angle, we could go, Christians should just kind of slow down with this in terms of, can I grab a hold of it? Is it great? But it's probably a more general question, Tyler, not necessarily summed up in the Enneagram.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'm trying to think where to go from here.
Yeah. Well, what I would say is, I think the discussion is, what do we do with personality traits?
Okay.
The interesting
personality tests and stuff like
the
that?
tests
Okay.
and where did they come from? I mean, this goes all the way back to Hippocrates, who basically wrote about the 4 temperaments: sanguine, melancholy. I'm going to skip the last 2. I can't remember, but at any rate, those that he felt were dictated by bodily fluids. Okay. Now we know that
checks out, I think.
all right. So that's the problem, is that you start to do this. But here's what we're doing. We all know that there are personality traits within us. And I think for the most part, they're self-evident, and you don't necessarily need a personality or a temperament test. Your grandmother can probably tell you what you're like. You know what I mean? Or your mom or whatever, and say, well, Tyler's like this. So these have a tendency to be known by us, not necessarily by taking a test. Now, the question is, well, are any of them helpful? Well, I would just first say all of them are not helpful if that's how you're viewing your identity. That's ridiculous. If you're a believer, then your identity is in Christ, and we don't start with personality. We don't start with those kinds of tests. However, you would say, I would ask you, there are just certain ways that you act. Your wife knows how you act, right?
Yeah, unfortunately.
And she's going to say, Tyler always kind of responds this way. True?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes that's really good, and sometimes it's not so good. And our wives are real critical in a good way, but of saying, hey, this is when it's not good. So we start to put those into categories, and I think temperament, personality traits, that's how it works. And so the problem is if you get hung up there. So I want to talk about the Enneagram and what I think is beneficial. But before we get there, I just want to be able to say, trying to pigeonhole people with personality traits leads to excuses, leads to justifying sin. And none of that's appropriate for a Christian, right?
Yeah. So that's kind of my next question was like, how would it play out if like you put your identity in the Enneagram or the DISC or the Myers-Briggs or insert whatever here?
So DISC. There's a whole bunch of people that would know DISC, and I'm happy to tell you what I think I am on the Enneagram points, whatever. But on DISC, I'm going to check out as a D. That's going to be my dominant personality, and that's a driver and somebody who is wanting action and getting some things done and all that kind of stuff. I score second in line as a C, which is kind of an anomaly in that world, but that's somebody that's a little bit more cautious. I don't consider myself cautious, but I am very analytical. So I'm going to compile a whole bunch of data, and I'm going to go look for some things, and I'm going to base decisions based on that. All right. So DC is a person who's not in the hemisphere of people. The other 2 traits in there are I and S.
Yeah, very people-oriented.
Yeah, they're influencers, or they're very much interested in other people's feelings and serving other people, and I'm not in that hemisphere according to this. So what does that look like for me? I have a job to do, and I don't need anybody else's help.
So if you're basing your identity off that, it gives you an excuse to
ramrod, to run over people, Now, in general, I do come across more forceful. That's, and on an Enneagram, it's an 8 or a challenger. And what does that mean? Well, it means for me, and this is where I think it's helpful, that here's a natural way that I respond in some situations, and now how do I have to check that? So rather than saying, this is just who I am. I'm sorry if you got run over, but I can't help that.
Yeah.
It's just who I am.
Okay, so let's look back at this question a little bit, and listen to a podcast about the occult origins and how it's linked with the New Age movement. Is it just another personality test, or is there more to it we should be concerned with?
Yeah, and I guess the example or analogy that I would draw, and I'm old enough to have faced this within the church, yoga. Now, what is yoga?
We've had podcasts about this. Yes, okay. It was awesome.
So, podcasts about yoga. Is that of something other than God? Well, most definitely Eastern mysticism. There's a whole bunch that's wrapped up in that for the mind, but no one's denying that the actual stretching and exercises can be beneficial to your body.
Right.
if we didn't call it yoga and we weren't necessarily trying to tap into some Eastern mysticism, all that stuff would work really well. It's stretching, and there's a whole bunch that's involved in hot yoga. You can now start doing and having an aerobic workout. So there's a bunch of things that are really good. It's like us as Christians to look at something and say, well, it's rock and roll, so it's got to go, or it's whatever. Pick your topic. We've done that plenty of times. I think in general, the Enneagram, for those that are way into it on the Christian side, I'd ask them to back it down a couple notches and look at it for what it is. It is and might be helpful in helping describe a personality, but it's not where we're going to put our trust in. Mm-hmm. And in fact, those personality traits, while they may be something that articulates who we are, I'm much more inclined to say, what's the besetting sin that's associated to that? And the only one that's able to transform that is Christ. So this isn't a matter of white knuckling it and just saying I'd do better. This is a matter of bringing those things to Christ. As someone who is maybe a challenger or more forceful in terms of conversation, it's listening. It's saying, yeah, I need to repent from jumping in on top of somebody, over the top of somebody, and back up from that, rather than saying it's just who I am. So I mentioned that in terms of what are the plus sides to it. I do think it can be helpful in self-awareness and describing who you are. There's a lot of times when that's helpful.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I found really insightful as I was reading this book, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes, called The Road Back to You, but as I was reading it, is I was actually thinking through my family members and staff who are the different numbers, and really trying to think like, okay, so how can I better communicate with them in order to care for them and love them well? You know, and so like I found that to be really helpful. And in fact, there's been already just, you know, I finished the book last week, and I've already had a few examples of like, oh, without the knowledge that I gained from, and the insight that I gained from those words, I would have responded this way.
Yep.
I took a little bit of a turn and responded this way instead, not, you know, denying anything that I feel I should have said or anything like that, but it's just the way I approach things. And guess what? It went better.
It went better.
You know,
like,
and in the intro of the book, they say, don't use this as a weapon. They say, like, you can easily use the Enneagram to say, this is just who you are, or, oh, you're that, so this. Yeah. And to be honest, like, I've gotten in trouble for that twice already since I read the book too, like with my wife mainly. But like, as an overall, it's actually been really helpful to be like, okay, like, let me think through, like, oh, I'm going to approach this way with my wife, or this way with my coworker, or whatever, just because of knowing, man, this is kind of where they're looking at things from, and maybe what their fear is that's driving them. And I don't know, I found that pretty helpful. So.
No, I think it's incredibly helpful. And if you go to the workaday world, I've got a son in the workaday world, and they use a number of different assessments, and they're very similar. In fact, probably just renamed for the workaday world, but they actually have an assessment that calculates how you work.
So what's Workaday World? Sorry, I'm trying.
That would be he's actually the director of a creative agency.
Okay,
he's not in ministry.
Got it. So like okay.
So somebody doing real work.
Okay.
At any rate, he's there, and so they do these assessments on how do you work, and it's amazing when they start to compile that, and they have it for all of their personnel, right? And so if I know that what Tyler needs is he needs the big idea. He doesn't need details. He needs the big idea. That's what's going to generate. And if I can get to that big idea, if I come in and give a bunch of details and he just kind of, and I go nowhere with an idea. But if I can come in and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. And you go, great, go do it. Another person's going to say, hey, I actually need to know why, or I need to know what this is going to cost us, or I'm putting that in Workaday World terminology. But those kinds of things are incredibly helpful. So you mentioned it in terms of just relationship with other people. You got kids, and I'm guessing you kind of know their personalities now.
You know what? I don't. I'm trying to figure it out. They're little still. I mean, my oldest is 5th grade, but I'm still like, oh man, I can't quite put my finger on it.
Yeah, and I think it's hardest in this situation, but I think it is helpful for Christians in terms of having some categories of trying to look and say, well, where do my kids fall? Because Scripture is really clear in a lot of ways as to what we're not supposed to do with kids, and we're not supposed to discourage them. And in Proverbs, we get some wisdom that says, hey, train up a child in the way he should go. Well, that's been rendered as we know the way he should go, and that's how we should train him. I'm not saying that that's completely devoid in there, but there is room for understanding that they're growing in a particular way. They have a personality, and there are things that I have Adam, my youngest son, was born an evangelist. I didn't do anything. It was just what he was. He wanted to do that. And I had another son that was incredibly skeptical. Now you could say, well, I'm doing something wrong as a parent, but it's knowing what they were and then being able to say personality-wise, here's what they need. One could absorb a whole bunch of stuff that way, and the other one couldn't, and just needed to say, hey, I need to discover this on my own. Well, you start to find that out. Personality or temperament tests can a lot of times really help, or at least give you some descriptors of what your kids or wife or coworkers are like.
Yeah. So I think this is great. I think that understanding the origins, or as best we can, of these, and again, like I think that one of the big things you said at the beginning is really helpful, like realizing this is not our identity, this is not where we put our hope, nothing like that, but that they can be really helpful, and in understanding ourselves, understanding each other, figuring out how to support and love each other well. It can be a beautiful thing.
It can. And I guess what I would want to emphasize is I think they're helpful when you look at the downside of whatever the trait is. So,
as relates to your spouse?
No, not as relates to your spouse. No, that's easy to do. Very easy to do. And that's the thing you don't want to do. So if this is self-awareness, so I will just say as an 8 on the Enneagram, I'm viewed as a challenger. And my besetting sin is lust or intensity. So it's not just simply in a sexual sense, but just that there is an intensity to my spirit. So what do I need to do there? I'm super intense, and I need to square that. I would say to you that the more that you can know that, then you would allow yourself the benefit of being transformed by Christ. So there's a lot of times I walk in and think I know exactly what's going on here, and I know what needs to be done. And I'm just going to run right over the top and get right to the point, and saying, yeah, actually it's not helpful to people, and you need to slow down and you need to back up, and you need to repent when you've done that. Not make an excuse and say, that's just the way I am. It's just the way God wired me. No, God did wire us, and he wired us to, as Christians, to be repentant and to say, hey, no, I sinned. I did that, and I'm looking for transformation. All those things that you're really good at, he gave those to you. And the things that you're not good at is the places he wants to transform. And that's where Jesus and following him comes into play in a big way. You're not going to transform your giftedness. It's a gift. He gave it to you. There's nothing to transform. It's the liabilities. And so I feel like it's most helpful there. That's where it was most helpful for me.
Yeah. Well, that's great stuff. And I really appreciate this question because it's coming from a thoughtful place.
It is.
I want
well
to,
said.
I want to learn about myself, but I also want to honor God in the way I'm doing that. And so, if you have questions, feel free about this or any subject. podcast@toBeTheChurch.com is the best way to send those in. You can also do those on social media @toBeTheChurch. Luke, thanks so much for being with us today.
It was a pleasure.
It will not be 5 more years before we have a Hendrix on this podcast. I imagine we'll be seeing your face and hearing your voice again. But until next week, have a great week, everybody.